So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions and the Indianapolis Colts had a battle last Saturday in which the Detroit Lions came out on top. Week 2 of the NFL preseason came and went for the Detroit Lions, and with that being the case, of course, we got quite a bit more information about some of the depth pieces on this Lions roster. Everybody from Tom Kennedy and Khalil Pimpleton to, the third and fourth string safeties of Juju Hughes and Cedric Boswell. We got to see everybody play, and week 2 especially gave us a really good opportunity to see some of the backups. Now, with that being the case, and with the Detroit Lions having their second preseason game behind them, and with the fact that the Detroit Lions backups will only get about 1/2's worth of a game in order to retain or earn their roster spot over the next week, we are going to take a look at some of the roster bubble guys today, some of the guys that either could or even maybe should make this active roster of 53 people, and talk about the guys that are on the bubble, guys that we should keep, and guys that the Detroit Lions should eventually cut. So with that being said, and with that being the case, let's get straight on into taking a look at Detroit Lions roster bubbles, who to keep and who to cut. Now, this video could start nowhere except the quarterbacking position, where I believe David Blau will beat out Tim Boyle for that QB2 spot. He started the second preseason game for the Detroit Lions, and although he did throw an interception, I thought that he played better than Tim Boyle. Tim Boyle might have had better numbers, it might have looked a little cleaner in the stat sheet, but I do think that Tim Boyle played it much safer. I think he took a lot of underneath stuff, didn't really test anybody, didn't really push the ball down the field. And while David Blau didn't do it a ton, he did have a couple risky passes in the end zone. He had a nice fade ball to Khalil Pimpleton that should have been caught for a touchdown, had a nice pass to Tom Kennedy in the end zone that could have been a touchdown if it had actually been, or to Khalif Raymond, I should say. If it were to be caught, it would have been a really good throw and a really good touchdown, but it was batted away by the defender. And while all these passes weren't necessarily completed, it shows that he's willing to put the ball in the end zone. He's willing to maybe put the ball in a little bit of risk for that major reward. And I just didn't see that out of Tim Boyle where I did for David Blau. So David Blau for me is in and Tim Boyle is out. Not a practice squad player, out of Detroit. Moving on to a running back battle. Jermar Jefferson has been in constant battle for his job since he entered the NFL a season ago, and I think this is the year that unfortunately he is going to lose it. He was the least efficient running back in week 2 of the NFL preseason for the Detroit Lions, having 7 carries for just 25 yards. And although he didn't have a couple nice long runs, I didn't think he was even close to the most impressive running back. And when you think of the fact that DeAndre Swift is going to stay, Jamal Williams is going to stay, Craig Reynolds is going to stay, Godwin Igwebuike will likely stay, and the fact that he was outperformed by Justin Jackson, I do think that Jermar Jefferson is going to be out. I don't think he's going to make the roster. I think he could potentially be a practice squad player, because I think there is still a little bit something there in Jermar's game, but I don't think he's played well enough throughout the preseason so far in order to warrant a roster spot. Now, going on to the wide receivers, this is going to be a very controversial one because I think there's a lot of players making a very good case for this position. But I think the Detroit Lions go into the 2022 season, week 1 versus Philadelphia, with a wide receiver core that consists of DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, Tom Kennedy, and Maurice Alexander. Now, I do think Trinity Benson does get the boot. I think Trinity Benson is going to get cut, and obviously this is taking into consideration that Jameson Williams will likely be on the NFI, as will Quintez Cephas, to at least start the NFL season, so the wide receiver position may be just a little bit thin. But I do think that if those players are on their respective NFI list or PUP list or anything like that, I do think if they are unable to play and they don't count against a roster spot, I think these will be the 6 wide receivers to stay. The first 3, right, Chark, Raymond, St. Brown are pretty obvious. Raymond, I think, although I think they could move on, I think his position at this point is a little bit redundant on the team. I think he's a good enough wide receiver to stay. Tom Kennedy has 100% earned his spot on the Detroit Lions, and if there's a roster spot with 2 wide receivers injured, Tom Kennedy will make the team. And then I think Maurice Alexander, because of his special team ability, I think will also make the roster. Had a very good return day versus the Indianapolis Colts and showed that he has that big play potential, which again is kind of a reason that I think that Kalif Raymond might be a roster bubble guy, because I think his position is redundant. We have a speed wide receiver, we have a deep threat, we have a kick and punt returner, we have everything that Kalif Raymond does, and we don't really need Kalif Raymond anymore. But with the injuries starting to pile up, I do think Kalif Raymond will make the active roster. Now, another wide receiver that I don't believe will actually be on the active roster, might likely make the practice squad, but definitely not the active roster this year, is Khalil Pimpleton, the UDFA from Central Michigan. He is a player that was a big standout early in training camp. He was creating separation, he was running good routes, he was, catching the football really, really well and creating big plays in team periods. But in the games, when the lights are on and the cameras are rolling, Khalil Pimpleton hasn't really done a whole lot for the Detroit Lions. He's had some drop issues, although he's gotten open and ran some good routes. He hasn't caught that many footballs. I think only has 4 receptions in the preseason for under 20 yards. He's not been very good, has not been very efficient. Did have a couple opportunities for a kick and punt return in week 1, but didn't really make the most of those opportunities. And I do think that although I was very high on Khalil Pimpleton going into the preseason, I do think that he has not played to stay. Now, on the opposite side of that, a different UDFA I do think will make the roster is Demetrius Taylor, the interior defensive lineman from Appalachian State. He has been a force on the defensive line, and you may not look at his statistics and say, "Oh, that's an Aaron Donald level threat. That's Chris Jones or whatever other interior pass rusher you want to talk about." He's not some elite talent right now, but in every single game, both games that he has played, including training camp as well, on top of that, Demetrius Taylor has been incredible. He's gotten tackled for losses, he has penetrated the pocket, he has forced the quarterback into really bad situations because of that interior pressure, and I don't think that Demetrius Taylor is going to play a lot, if he plays at all, in the 2022 season, but I do think he has played his way onto this roster. I think he has outperformed Bruce Hector. I think he has outperformed Jay Sean Cornell, and I do believe he will make it as the 5th or maybe even 6th if they keep that many interior defensive linemen right there next to Aleem, Levi, Michael Brockers, and Isaiah Bugg. I think he will be that 5th guy, and I think he will have an impact on some obvious pass rushing situations. Now, getting onto the rest of the defense, I do think the edge rotation is going to be a really, really tough decision for the Detroit Lions because they have a lot of people. Right, Charles Harris, Aiden Hutchinson, and Austin Bryant, I think, are pretty easy makes for the Lions roster. I think that Julian Okwara, as well as John Kaminsky, will make the roster as the Detroit Lions pass rushers. John Kaminsky has been very good over the past 2 preseason games with the Detroit Lions without really having the opportunity to study the playbook too much. And he's gotten a sack and gotten a pressure in both games so far for the Detroit Lions, and I think he will make the active roster. And again, kind of like the wide receiver position, I do think that Romeo Okwara is going to start on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list for the Detroit Lions, so he will not take up an active roster spot to start the season, where I think John Kaminsky will take that spot. Now, looking at some of the edge rushers that didn't make it, I think that this does include James Houston, and I think James Houston will make the practice squad if he makes it through waivers. I do think that he will have the opportunity to make it either on the Lions practice squad or somewhere else, because I think he is extremely talented, but I just don't see him making it an edge rusher. I think maybe linebacker is a better fit for him, and I think they might list him as a potential linebacker just so they don't carry 7 defensive ends and 7 edge rushers. But if we're talking just strictly as an edge rusher, I don't think James Houston has had a good enough preseason to make it. So I think instead of maybe cutting him, you move him to linebacker, you move him to outside linebacker, inside linebacker, wherever you have that extra spot. I think James Houston should make the roster, but I don't think it's going to necessarily be listed as an edge rusher. Now, at linebacker, I do think that he is going to make it. I think our linebacking core this year should be Derek Barnes, Rodrigo, Jared Davis, Alex Anzalone, James Houston as our 5, and I do truly believe that Anthony Pittman should not, I do truly believe that Josh Woods should be our 6th linebacker if we do carry that many guys. I think Anthony Pittman is either a practice squad or maybe a cut player. Although I think he's very good. I think he's a good locker room guy. He's been here for a long time for preseason games. He's just not a starting caliber linebacker in the NFL. And if we're going to carry guys, I want guys that I know can start and play well in NFL games that count. And so far, I think that those 6 guys are the best opportunities, which does leave, of course, Sean Deion Hamilton and Anthony Pittman on the outskirts of this roster battle. And then I do think there are a couple safety and couple cornerbacks that are going to get cut. Juju Hughes did make the roster last year, but I think will kind of get cut. I think he's going to get washed away behind, Deshaun Elliott, Tracy Walker, Kirby Joseph, and Ifeatu Melifonwu. And then I think Bobby Price for very similar reasons, right? You're not going to carry 8 to 9 cornerbacks on the roster. You have Okudah, you have Amani, you have Jerry, you have AJ, you have Mike Hughes, you have Chase Lucas. You have a lot of guys, right? You're not going to carry 7, 8, 9 cornerbacks. I just don't think that there's enough room for Bobby Price. But again, I think he's a guy that is a huge opportunity to make these special teams this year. So with that being said, those are kind of my roster bubbles, cuts, and keeps. Some players might be surprising. Some players you might say, oh, they played well enough to make the roster. And I do think every player on the Lions roster right now has the opportunity to make it. I think everybody's position is up in the air. And I don't think there's one player that is a depth player that is a lock for the roster. I don't think there's a second or third string guy that has 100% safety on the roster or at his position, because I think this roster, I think this team is incredibly competitive and incredibly close. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what players would you keep and would you cut if you were the Lions general manager after 2 preseason games and after knowing what's happening at training camp? What players do you think deserve to make the roster, and what players do you think either deserve practice squad spots or just to be cut altogether? I'd be very curious to you guys think. But with all of that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!